So everyone seems to be settled. So it is my pleasure to say a very warm welcome on behalf of the Diocese of Stockholm and Paideia to this 8th lecture in memory of Krister Stendahl, who was a Bishop of Stockholm between 1994 and 95, and who previously was Dean of Harvard Divinity School, a New Testament scholar and a promoter of Jewish-Christian dialogue. Krister Stendahl was involved in the foundation of Paideia, and it's our pleasure to have them as our partner in arranging these lectures. And we are very happy to see the new director, Vanja of Salzberger, as our guest today. For many years, Bishop Krister's widow, Brita Stendahl, attended these lectures, but she sadly passed away in February this year. So I think we should also dedicate this lecture to her memory. She was not only Krister Stendahl's partner, discussing with him and translating his books, but she was also a scholar in her own right. I'm not sure whether her brother Olle Jonsson has arrived. He was supposed to. Is Olle here?
Weren't you Olle? No?
No? Okay. As a representative of the family. And I will also read a short message from Krister's son Johan to us. I would like to say how very happy it makes us to hear of this year's choice of a speaker and of his choice of a topic. My father was both passionately and presciently engaged with the necessary challenge reflected in the title of Rabbi Melchior's talk. And I feel my personal regret at not being able to attend and listen to this lecture, I cannot help but think of how much my father would have loved to be there, stimulated in thought and drawn forward in hope by this faithful servant of peace. We shall be thinking of you on Monday. May the Blessed One bless your gathering. So now, it's my honor to welcome Rabbi Melchior as this year's speaker. He is a descendant of 7 generations of Danish rabbis and now serves as the chief rabbi of Norway and as rabbi of a vibrant Orthodox community in Jerusalem. He was elected to the Knesset in 1999 and served for 10 years in roles including Minister for Social Affairs and World Jewry, Deputy Minister of Education and Culture, and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Rabbi Melchior is the founder and chairman of the Mosaica Center for Religious Conflict Transformation in the Middle East, which actively works to build a religious peace between leaders of all religions in the Middle East. He has also founded several other initiatives promoting dialogue in Israeli society. So a very warm welcome, and we look so much forward to hearing your speech. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me, giving me the honor of being able to speak here in memory also of the Bishop and Professor Krister Stendahl, honored Bishop here of Stockholm, and my friends from Paideia, who I had the chance to speak to earlier this morning, and its new director. This is her first day in work. She started at 9 o'clock in the morning. I was the first speaker there, so we'll always remember that. It's a special honor for me to be here and be able to give this lecture with this topic, as was also said in the words of Krister Stendahl's son, because of who he was and what he stood for, both in his studies, in his expertise, from what he shared of learning, of his Christian learning, of especially his expertise in the figure of Paulus and how he gave new understanding of the Jewishness and the relationship of Paulus, but not least, I say, as a Jew, to his friendship with the Jewish people, with the state of Israel, with a friendship which was not on anybody else's expense. And it was a friendship which was expressed in so many ways, but he also, together with colleagues, some are here also present today, created, together with Professor Hartman, special learning institutes of learning together, studying together in Jerusalem, and work he did in Sweden, work he did in America, and he was somebody who we could always trust. We knew where he was, and this is very important. He was a tall, important leader, and so was his wife. They were both together leaders. And they had, besides from what you mentioned, they also had, according to what I heard, a very good partnership with each other. That is not an obvious thing in these days. One of my partners in working for religious peace, Rabbi Menachem Fuhrman, Zichrono Livracha, he always used to say that if a man and a woman who are so different, if they can work it out together, then there is no reason whatsoever that Judaism and Islam can't make peace together. And he's a person who really worships his wife. He in practice, he's unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but he kissed her feet in practice, not just figuratively. And but this is not easy. And so what reason is there that we shouldn't be able to work it out together? And Krister Stendahl was a person of that kind of stature. Together with his wife, they stood together in everything which they did in public life. And we remember Britta at this occasion. I think that it's a beautiful thing if this lecture will be also in her memory, because she was a person who stood with him in this whole task. I do also want to mention something which for me was moving. He talked about it in his lectures. He was also always, when he came, he did like it's a small gesture, and I don't know if it's a necessary gesture also. For me, not a necessary gesture, but when he came to lecture in Jerusalem, I always remember that he took his cross, which he always bore with pride, and he put it in the pocket when he lectured in Jerusalem. He said, I know what this cross means for so many Jews here in Jerusalem, and therefore, in my humility and my, he didn't say that openly, but this is what he put it in the pocket just to show he has it, he wears it, but he also knows how many Jews over the years suffered from this symbol, and therefore this was his expression also of modesty towards that suffering. He has, as most of you know, this is what he's known for. If you open Wikipedia, this is the first thing you'll find about him. He had these three principles which guided in interreligious conversation. and dialogue. And for me, especially the first two of these principles are guidelines in everything I do in interreligious activity. I don't so much deal with interreligious dialogue. I deal more with the issues which we're talking about here today, which have more to do with concrete working together on issues as democracy and peace, concrete working together more than studying together and dialoguing together. But I think that we should just need to repeat always those principles, because they should be the key also to what's going on. They're much more relevant today and much more important to today's society than they were when he expressed them, I think, first time here as bishop in Stockholm I think it was in 1985 that he first expressed them. And he expressed these three principles. The first principle was, when trying to understand another religion, you should ask the adherents of that religion and not its enemies. This is important. First of all, it's important to understand the other religion, which we don't necessarily want. That's the first thing, to understand. And then who do you ask about it? But what we usually do is we listen to those, either its enemies or the people who, like, say, are from that religion, but attacking that religion. And that's not the way of understanding the other religion. Ask its adherents for their interpretation of their religion. That's number one. Number two, which I think is even more important, and which we totally forget, don't compare your best to their worst. And this is what we always do. When we talk together, we always talk about how wonderful we are, and we of course say, we know what the others are, we know what the others are like. Our religion is all about peace and the others, we know. Don't compare your best to their worst. This is the second principle. These two principles, I think, are so important in our world today. So important. The third principle is also important, but maybe not the most important, is leave place for what we call holy envy. What is holy envy? It means that you can be envious also of good traditions in other religions. That there are things we can learn from each other, and we can have a holy envy of good things in other traditions, and we can adopt them or not adopt them, or be a little envious that they have this and we don't have this. Like when I'm together with my Muslim friends and they can eat everything out when they're out, and I can't eat all these things. Not only that, there are things which are more substantial than that, but we always say that they're very strict, and truth is that they're not so strict and everything. Some things we're more strict with them, they're more strict with. Okay. We can be a little envious sometimes. I want to go from there and have this in mind to the issue which I think I decided on today, but which was very well accepted here by my hosts immediately when I suggested this. And try to give you a taste of this topic, which I think will in very many ways decide what will be the future of the world. This is the topic. We deal every day with the symptoms. We deal with a war here and a war there, and we deal with terror, and we deal with the fear, and we deal with the populism which is a result of that, and so on, you have elections now, you have Brexit, and you have Trump, and you have Le Pen, and you have I don't know what. We have in Israel, we have different phenomena, and you have all over. I can give you many different examples and so on. We could go on and on and on. So but we don't deal with the substance. What are we talking about? The main issue is it possible? Maybe it isn't. Is it possible for radical, fundamental religion to live in a world together with democracy and peace and what we can call humanism or human rights? Can they live in this world together? And I want to use partly our peace process in the Middle East, in our parts of the Middle East, as an example of this, but I want to say that this issue is universal. And what we're building today in Israel and the Palestinian areas, with radical leaders on both sides, is today being copy-pasted a lot of different places. In Europe, in Africa, Nigeria. Even last week I had a lecture for leading people in India, leading Hindus and Muslims, and they want me to come there to, it's far beyond what I understand and so on, but it's the same issues, it's the same questions. Can radical, fundamental religion live together? Is it possible? And the general knowledge in the Western world is that it's not possible. It can't work. And then with all the consequences of this. And again, I want to work a little from the peace process in the Middle East as an example, but everything can be translated to every single discussion you have going on. Take France, discussion on burkinis in France. But it's again, all of these discussions are symptoms of issues of what will be in a post-religious, post-ritual Europe, who doesn't know how to deal with the sudden phenomena of religion coming, and then it mixes in because there's suddenly phenomena of terror, and you have the fear, and then you suddenly have also a secular dogmatism which is in place, and which forgets then that the French Revolution was not just about freedom from religion, but also freedom to religion. And suddenly you have the most liberal people who will not make it possible for women to go and swim in burkini, or to wear what they want to wear, and so on. Now, it's complicated, of course, because there is an issue of the majority society, of society defending majority values, and what do you do then when you have minorities and other values which are important in our society. I'll come back to this later, maybe, if we have time. Let me go back to our process in the Middle East, and just say, and I don't want to go into the details of it, but just use here general concepts. Religion, the religious identities, the existential issues, which included the cultural and ethnical aspects of the conflict, were left outside the peace process from day one in the peace process. Now, this was done of a whole series of different reasons, which have to do with the substance of my talk here today. Number one reason comes from within religion. The religious attitudes, main religious attitudes towards land and towards the relationship to the other, at least according to many of the interpretations, were for many seen as attitudes which could not fit into the attitudes which were necessary in order to bring them into the peace process. And therefore it was seen as if the religious identity, attitudes, the understanding that these attitudes would not fit into a peace process, which necessarily would need compromise of interests when it comes to issues of land and refugees and water and other issues which were on the table. Therefore, because of the attitudes of religion, which says all the land is ours, on the Jewish side, all Eretz Yisrael is ours, on the Muslim side, I'll do it here symmetrically to make it easier. It's not necessarily symmetrical, but the Waqf, the land is part of the Waqf, it's part of Dar al-Islam, it's part of the Muslim. Therefore, we leave it out. Reason number one. Number two, religion is seen in its nature as being something which is total, which you can't compromise on. As religious people, we don't compromise on God. We don't compromise on our belief. Our belief is something which is total. And at least in the views of people from outside religion, when they look at religious people, they say, well, this is a totality. We need a political process which needs compromise. In religion, it's only the whole thing. You can have a piece of peace, but you can't have a piece of truth. Because religion talks about an absolute truth and also an absolute peace. If we talk about a peace, it has to be a prophetic peace, which is total. Therefore, because this peace necessarily won't be that kind of dream peace we're talking about, it will necessarily have to be a piece of peace. Therefore, religion cannot have any role in this peace, because that's against the nature of all kinds of religion. The third reason was a concept which is basically the Western concept, but which was very much accepted by both the Israeli and Palestinian partly policymakers. And that was the kind of dichotomal concept of differentiation between state and church. Religion has no place in the public sphere, in the public decision making. And therefore, we politicians, the secular politicians, the secular state, is what decides what has to do with the political sphere. Religion, they take care of what goes on in the church, in the synagogue, in the mosques, and that's their role. This division of state and church, of the dichotomy of state and church, which might be a good model, that is what was the concept which led both the Israeli policymakers and by far and large also the Palestinian policymakers, and for sure the American and European policymakers who dealt with the peace process. Reason number, I don't know where I am now, number 4 or 5 or wherever, was the concept amongst many, not least in Israel, but also I can quote all kinds of Palestinian leaders like this, Yasser Abed-Rabbu and Kanafani and many other leading Palestinian thinkers, who said, we want the peace not only because we're for peace, but because we want this as part of the normalization / westernization of our society. We want this to be a part of the tension which exists in all societies, including in the Israeli-Palestinian society. There is a tension of the public space, of what role does religion have in the public space, what role should it have? And we want the peace to be a part of this, so that we need the peace in order to have a total secularization of our society. And this was expressed by many, I can give many, many examples of the expression of this on both sides. So much so that people like Yasser Abed-Rabbu said to me, if this is a peace without, where in Palestine there will not be a total separation of state and church, whatever church it is there. It's not the church, but the Sharia, or whatever you call it. I don't want peace. I don't want that peace. Or I can quote endless number of Israeli politicians who expressed exactly the same thing. So that the peace becomes a project of a legitimate point of view, by the way. It's totally legitimate to fight for a secularization of the society. But this became part of the battle for peace. The result of all this, and several other reasons which I don't have time to go into, is the situation we have today. This is the main reason, and by the way, again, not only in Israel-Palestine, but the main reason for a lot of the situation we have in the world today. The situation is that the peace couldn't work. That it was very good that Rabbi went out and said, we need to work for peace as if there's no terror, and we need to fight the terror as if there's no peace negotiations. And that the settler movement continued at the same time as the peace movement. And on the Palestinian side, that the Hamas grew in strength, and so much so that it won the elections, the only real elections which were and which counted, the elections in 2006, and we ignored it. So the whole world said, well, we don't recognize this. We ignored it. And the Israeli left went on saying, of course, the peace camp, of course we don't want to make peace with the Hamas. There's no such thing. This is an impossible thing, because it contradicts the whole concept of all the issues which I talked to you about. There can't be such a thing. And the result is that we are where we are. That we were trying to sell a product to the Israeli public which nobody really believes in. So you can't say, well, we'll make a peace with a Palestinian leader, be it Abu Mazen, or any other Palestinian leader who one day might come instead of him. But we don't make peace with Islam. People will say, well, Islam is the stronger force in the Muslim world. So what does it help that you then make a peace with Abu Mazen if you don't have peace with Islam? And you can't make peace with Islam because that's impossible. Everybody knows that. That's what all the experts in Islam teach us. All the professors in the university and all the commentators in the television, and we hear them every day. It's on the front page news every day. We know that fundamental Islam can never work with peace and democracy. That can't be done. So people say, well, then this is an impossible project. And they come to the same conclusion when it comes to Iraq, and when it comes to Nigeria, and when it comes to France, and when it comes to everywhere else. So, what people have done now over the last 20 years, since really the collapse of the project of Oslo, is that we continue to go down the blind alley again and again and again. I've used this expression before. Driving down, the last times we've driven down this blind alley with 4 flat tires, it's not a very good idea to do that. You don't get very far. And not ask ourselves if there is not something wrong with the goal to try to make peace, but maybe we've gone about it with the wrong means, and maybe there are other things which we could do which we haven't done, which should be done and can be done, but in a different way. And instead of that, we start saying it's their fault, and it's their fault, and we boycott those, and we boycott those, and we hate those, and we hate those, and we have one war and one conflict after the other, and people are suffering. More the Palestinians than the Israelis, but also many Israelis are suffering. And there's no solution. Nobody believes it's possible anymore. You ask the Israelis if it's possible, they'll say, we want peace, but the others don't want. You ask the Palestinians, they'll say, we want peace, but the others don't want. This is a total mirror effect on both sides. So we set out some years ago to try to see if it's possible to turn this around. Maybe it's impossible. Maybe the axioma of fundamental religion and peace and democracy working together, maybe it's true. Maybe it can't work together. Maybe this is not possible. And then, well, then we'll need to do what maybe is happening today, not with big success. We need to control the conflicts and, I don't know, just to go on as an act as this and wait till the whole thing blows up. And wait till Great Britain leaves Europe and Trump becomes the president of America and Le Pen becomes the president in France and whoever is the president in Hungary and whoever will be the president in Syria and I don't know what, and then we'll see what happens, and God rescue us. As we say in Hebrew, we can only trust God in heaven, and that's it. Or is it possible to do something else? Let's stop this stupid argument, who's right, who's wrong the whole time, who's more to be. We're not going to go anywhere with this argument. It's not going to bring us anywhere. The two peoples are there, between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. They're not going to go anywhere. We have very soon, a majority of the Jewish people in the world are living in the land of Israel. And we're not going to go anywhere else. And the Palestinians are living there. So from my philosophical point of view, this is quite easy. I believe, and this is a personal belief which doesn't commit anybody else, I personally believe that this is part of a messianic process. I personally believe this. I believe that this is a fulfillment of what is in the prophecies. and that the Jewish people has come back again to its homeland is a fulfillment and a concrete fulfillment of what was the dream of the Jewish people. I believe this with my full heart. But just as I believe that that is true, I don't think that it's a divine mistake that there is other people living in this country. Just as God did this, He did that. I can even give you some sources, some Talmudic sources for this, but I won't go into a Talmudic lecture now. But I can give you the Talmudic sources for that. This was going to happen. That when the Jewish people left this country, that somebody else was going to come in and live there and make this their homeland. There are Talmudic sources which have to do with Messianic times, which talk about this. They're not always taught, these sources, but they're there. And they're important sources. My Palestinian friends don't always like this source because they think that they were the ones who were there first and we came in afterwards, and therefore they don't like that source. Although we have the same conclusion. That's okay. Everyone thinks that they were the original ones and the others came in. Okay, fine. It's okay. We don't argue, it's not important. But I accept that those of my more radical friends who totally politically are in disagreement with me, they don't accept my views on religious pluralism and many other issues. But what I went out to try to find out is that in spite that we're in total disagreement on very many basics, is it possible to open the tent and include them on both sides, the radicals, the fundamentalists, in, I don't know also if I'm a fundamentalist, maybe I'm also a fundamentalist, I don't know. Whatever, it doesn't matter. In the tent of peace, all those who were outside, all those who were skeptic, all those who were against, even those who wrote the school books of how to blow up the Jews. Is it possible? Not as a one-time gesture, but is it possible to create a serious movement? And my message to you is complex, but the bottom line is it's possible and it's necessary. That this thing which we're doing in the world today, not least in the Western world, to put up the choice in front of people, you can choose between your identity and peace. You can choose between your identity and democracy. That is not going to work. Might work some places in the world, but in the vast majority of places in the world, it's not going to work. That is not the right choice. And there is a process going on amongst radical Jews and amongst radical Muslims. And it's so exciting, and we know nothing about it because we're so preoccupied with our own thing. It's thrilling to watch it and to be a part of it. Because of my work, I've been invited now, together with my Islamic friends and together with my Jewish Zionist friends. And this is something which is quite incredible, because the Muslim world is becoming more and more hateful towards Israel and towards the Jewish people, more and more anti-Semitic. Those who want to say they're anti-Semitic, yes, it's true. And therefore you can't make peace just with some leader sitting in a room and then come out and say we've changed it. It's not going to work. If you don't work on the basic attitudes in the peoples which are, and who has the influence? What is the biggest NGO? It's religion. Now, it's not only necessarily the established religious leaders. They're younger leaders, they're those who have the influence on the internet, on the social media. There's many different levels of leadership. We're working with all levels of leadership. And the people are asking questions. I'll tell you a discussion I had last week. I was sitting last week with a group of 25 to 30-year-old Islamic leaders in the Holy Land, from the Palestinian territories, from Israel. And we were sitting, it was a big group, they're quite important leaders. They have the influence which their teachers don't have. That's why their teachers asked me to meet there. The whole group, they have a group of about 20, they already have big mosques which they're imams of. They all have MAs and they're on the way to doctorates. Very bright, very intelligent, Islamists. They're all formally or informally connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, the Hamas / whatever. But because they're involved with some of the work we're doing, they're open to the questions of democracy. And we discussed issues of democracy. And they come to me with claims. It's not easy. They say, well, we feel that the Western world is hypocritical when it comes to democracy. They want democracy only when the result of democracy is exactly as they want it. When the elections in Algeria or in Tunis or whatever, or in Egypt, when they come out wrong, then they don't want democracy. Or in Palestine, when the Hamas wins the election, then suddenly they go, oh, then we don't want democracy. No, then we don't want democracy. Or in Turkey, they also use that as an example. They said if they had succeeded in throwing out Erdogan of Turkey, then the Western world would have blessed it and say, oh, that's wonderful, we got rid of him. They said, you're hypocrites. You're hypocrites. You don't really believe in democracy, you just believe in puppets. When Morsi won the elections, which no doubt were free democratic elections, and he was overturned, the whole world is accepting the leadership now in Egypt. What kind of belief in democracy is that? Now, these are not easy questions. And you have to look at it from their perspective. They are in the path of thinking of democracy, yes, as a part of their belief in Islam. These are the future leaders. They represent a whole age group now who are looking at the world and in bewilderness. Well, of course, I talk to them about democracy not just being the question of who is elected, but of freedom of speech and of how the internal debate is in the society. And we talked about many things, and I felt that we have, they asked now to meet once every third week, that we can study together democracy and talk about how peace will work. It's a very, very exciting process, but it was important for me also to tell you how things sometimes look from people who themselves are totally committed, but they're looking at the world and asking questions. Now, what I wanted to say to you is that a peace process, which is not instead of the political process. I don't want religious peace to substitute the political peace, but which paves the way for the peoples to be able to adopt this. Suddenly something happens which changes and transforms opinions. When I sit with the people who have written the school books of how to blow up Jews, with the most radical people, you wouldn't believe what kind of people which we sit with. And I yet have not had one unsuccessful meeting. Not one. And people ask afterwards, these are the serious leaders.
And they say, but why didn't you do this up till now? And they said, but everybody always came with an approach of a secularization process. We don't want the peace as a secularization process. There might be another discussion. If we're to be a religious society, secular process, that's another discussion. But if that is the condition of peace, then we don't want it. But you're presenting a peace in a religious language, and it's a total different story. We are using a religious jurisprudence which is exciting, and you can again see, I'll give you an example, not from the Jewish tradition, from the Muslim tradition. For example, I can give you many examples of this, but this is an issue which often comes up. You might have heard about it also. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah. This is a famous treaty which Muhammad made with then the tribe of Quraysh. There was the conflict between Mecca and Medina. I don't want to go into all the details. Why is this so important? If you talk about the Israeli-Palestinian issue, but also anything which has to do with Muslims. Why? Because the perception amongst Jews is that Muhammad made a deal, a sulha, but he made this deal because it was convenient. And the day it wasn't convenient for him anymore, when he was on the military upper hand, he broke the deal. Now, why is that politically important? This was something which happened in the year, I don't know when it was, 628, I think it was. It happened in the year 628. Why is that important for the people? After Arafat signed the Oslo Accords, Arafat went to Johannesburg, made a speech in Johannesburg, and he was attacked. How can you make a treaty with the Jews? How can you compromise on Palestine? And he said, what's the problem? I just went in the footsteps of the Prophet Muhammad. He did this in Hudaybiyah. I did the same thing. Now all the Israelis always say, you see, Arafat immediately after Oslo went to Johannesburg and he said, I did exactly like Muhammad. I made this treaty because we were weak. We needed this treaty. But when we will be strong, we'll break the treaty and we'll take over. It's all ours. But he never said that. I don't know what he meant or not, didn't mean, I don't know. But he never said that. But that's what we all heard. You can open every single Israeli newspaper, every single opinion piece, you will always hear the speech of Arafat in Johannesburg. Now, this comes up also here. I sat a couple of weeks ago with the person who is responsible for Israeli security in the Ministry of Defense, a very, very responsible military person. He's been responsible for our relationship with the Arab world forever, knows every detail. We talked about religious peace. And he also used this. He says, but this is the attitude. When I came to the head of Egyptian intelligence, he said to me, you should know that we are going to break the deal when we can, just like Muhammad did. Now, the religious leaders who we are working with, the fundamentalist religious leaders say, what are you talking about? You think that our prophet works on the basis of a lie? Our prophet said to everybody who criticized him for that deal that you have to fulfill every word you say, every promise you give. And therefore the Treaty of Paideia was the basis for the religious jurisprudence of the peace of Salah ad-Din, who was the big hero, military hero of Islam, who beat the Crusaders. And he made the religious peace when he was strong. He didn't need to do that. He made the religious peace based on the Treaty of Paideia. But nobody who knows about it, who cares about it, who deals with it. We don't understand this. We know that the Muslims are like this, and the Jews are like this, and the Jews are... But suddenly, the rabbis, who know the same as the secular professors know, that Islam will never make peace with us. When the radical rabbis suddenly sit together with the Islamists, and including the secular rabbis, including the people who have been in strongest opposition, when they see that there are serious people on the other side who deal with these issues in a serious way, then they also need to deal with it in a serious way. And suddenly you find a new language coming out of this, and new possibilities opening. And suddenly the possibility of a cooperation and peace and democracy is possible. And I end off, because I promised that there would be room for questions, I'll end off also mentioning, this is also in the issues of the Temple Mount and other issues when you're together. What happens is that if you take the conflict and you start to peel off the levels and the layers, and you come to the essence, suddenly you see that people who are serious, who don't only deal in interests, you see, if it's a piece of interests, then there will always be other interests which are stronger. The secular piece, which was built, not secular here being people who are not religious, but I'm talking about the general peace. People said, why do we need peace in Israel? Why do we need peace? Because otherwise we'll lose our Jewish majority, or these were the arguments. There was poor arguments. At a certain stage they worked, and afterwards they didn't work. Why? Because if it's a question of interest, you always find other interests which are stronger. People say, yes, but it's dangerous. But the interests of security, interests of economy. We saw what happened in Gaza. You'll always find other arguments. But if it's a question of belief, of values, if you look at the basis of don't do to your neighbor what you don't want your neighbor to do to you, as a basic value of who we are and what we are, if you come to the attitude, for example, our Muslim friends, when they look at this and they see, they talk about the issue of compromising, which means peace with a Jewish state. Why should they be against this? So they're against it maybe because they have a dream of a Khalifa, that it should all be one big Muslim state. So what they say is two things. Either, number one, they have the jurisprudence of making peace in spite of the dream, or you can keep your dream for the future, just as we can keep our dreams of how things should look for the future, but we deal with the reality of today in the meantime. So until the days of the Khalifa, or until the days of the Messiah, we'll work it out. That's one possibility. Another possibility, which some of the Muslim authorities say, they say even in the days of the Khalifa, the Jews are here, they will still be Jews, they have a right to run their lives, they have an autonomy on their lives. We call this autonomy a state. They can do that also when there is the Khalifa. So in this way, you have the most serious Islamic authorities backed up by the biggest Islamic authorities in the Muslim world, who come to a solution which is a religious solution. On the Jewish side, we have the same kind of decision. If you say that the main problem with the peace is that it's breaking up the dream of the messianic dream, that we're in a process of messianism and that soon we'll, and that it's cutting off this messianic dream, because we will be much less Jewish if we lose territory. Or maybe there's a way of solving this. Maybe we can stay as Jews in a Palestinian state. If it's this kind of peace we're talking about, why not? Or maybe we can have a state which is much more Jewish, which will take its Jewishness much more seriously. Not in religious legislation, but in many other ways. Or maybe there can be a talk in this way of something which is much more serious, where we don't lose off in a process by making peace, but we win. We have a win-win situation, which is not excluding the secular population, but it's a win-win situation. And I can tell you, I'm dealing now with Shiites and the Sunnis and Kurds in Iraq, very leading people who want to do exactly the same. Exactly the same. They're sick and tired of what Iraq has become. And they need a religious peace in order to turn this into something safe. And the same they're trying to do in Nigeria. First they did in Kaduna, and now they're bringing it to northern Nigeria. And this is the way we can isolate the haters. Then those who won't be a part of it. They're not religious fundamentalists. These are people who are just haters. They're anarchists. They're using religion, yes, but they're anarchists. They don't go into any kind of serious religious debate. There's not one Islamic authority who hasn't gone out against the Islamic State and its regulations. But we think that this is probably the true Islam. And you hear the debate going on, and this debate, they need an Israeli-Palestinian dialogue and peace for them to deal with the hatreds and the anti-Semitism in the Muslim world. Just as we need it in the Jewish world and the Christians need it, because they've also become polarized. And there are those who believe that you have to hate Israel and boycott Israel and become anti-Semites even, and there are those who believe that you have to love Israel and hate the Palestinians and I don't know what, and you have to... And we're becoming insane, all of us. Instead of supporting a win-win situation, we're supporting a lose-lose situation. And therefore we need each other in this in order to create something. And these are my last words, I promise. I was involved in this burkini discussion in France because I attacked some rabbis there who went out for forbidding the burkini, and then some other rabbis I suppose went out. So how can you as rabbis go out and you know, I don't understand, I just don't get it. And then they wanted to go out with a campaign which said, first burkini and then kippah. No, first they'll forbid the burkini and then they'll forbid the kippah. They wanted to photograph me with the thing, and I wanted to make a big campaign of support of my opinion. I said, you haven't started to understand my opinion. I don't want it to be first burkini and then kippah. I don't want to protect Muslim rights because tomorrow they'll attack the Jews. We've misunderstood the words of Pastor Niemeyer. It's become too... we've misunderstood what he meant. I hope you know what he meant. Yes. Whatever. If you don't, then go back and read it on the internet. It's not because tomorrow they're going to attack me. It's because you can't create democracy and civilization and create a better world where people are persecuted. It's against the substance of what we believe in and what kind of society we want to create together. That's why. Not because it's our personal interests. This is how we build society and civilization together. And it's necessary in Stockholm and it's necessary in Jerusalem. And the good news is that there are lots and lots of people. They're under the radar till today, but we promise over the next couple of months that we will come out over the radar, and maybe something is being said here and to whoever will watch this. There is a lot of hope of a lot of people who understand that we need to build these kind of coalitions, not to give up our identities or our dreams or our truths, but because we have our dreams and truths and our identities, to know then how to respect the other identities and truths and to build a much better world together. And I think that those were the dreams and the legacy of very much of Bishop, Professor and friend Krister Stendahl, so therefore I think it was fitting that this was the subject which I spoke about today. Thank you very much for listening.